to the Constitutional Law Society's online lecture series. We at Constitutional Law Society are a group of committed individuals to develop a culture of academic excellence in constitutional law at the university or beyond the university also. Today, I feel very honored and privileged to introduce our eminent speakers, Professor Sebastian Laffrance. Professor Laffrance is Crown Counsel of Canada and professor at University de Hathi. He has extensively written on Indian and Canadian constitutional law. He has also been renowned academic with various chapters in constitutional law books. Our second speaker is Professor Shruti Bedi. Professor Bedi is the director of Center for Constitutional Law and Public Policy at UILS Punjab. She has authored several important books and articles with publishers of repute. Welcome Professor Laffrance and Professor Bedi and every participants of this lecture. Before we proceed with the lecture, I am very delighted to inform that apart from our students, we have two eminent people who agreed to join us today. Our former conveners, Ms. Aparna Singh and Mr. Swapnil Tripathi. In fact, Mr. Tripathi is our founding convener. The lecture would be moderated by our co-conveners, Mr. Rajat Sinha and Mr. Amlan Misra. Thank you. And thank you, everyone.
So without putting any further time in the introductions, I would like to give the stage to Professor Laffrance and Professor Bedi in any way they want to start this lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajat Sinha, and thank you, Rajesh Ranjan, for bringing us to this platform and for making us a part of your university activities, especially those relating to constitutional measure, and an honor to be here. My co-presenter, Professor Laffrance, and I would be speaking on a very important issue which is concerning the world, in fact, today, but we limit our area of discussion to India, which will be dealt with by me, and Canada, which will be dealt with by Professor Laffrance. This is the impact of COVID-19 on the issue of fundamental rights in both these countries. How have they been affected, and how is the country, the government, the judiciary, the people dealing with the situation? So I would like to begin with the Indian perspective, because being from here, that is how we start, and then Mr. Laffrance will move on to the Canadian perspective. Well, it's June 2020, and a few months ago, we would not have thought of being in a situation that we are presently in. The entire world today is grappling, dealing, battling, whatever be the choice of words, with this COVID-19 lockdown and its repercussions. In fact, the impact has been felt so strongly throughout the world, and India has not been left untouched. We've suffered immensely, and the more the vulnerable people there are in the country or in the world, those are the people who have been disproportionately impacted by the lockdown, by this disease, the pandemic, which we are facing today. And if you look at India, it is the lockdown has been called as one of the most difficult measures that has been taken throughout the world, where about 12.2 crore people have lost their jobs. So many more have been rendered homeless. There is inadequate financial assistance in any form. There is displacement of people, migrants. We see images every day where they are seen walking barefoot, facing all kinds of hardships that you can not even think of. And they're walking long distances to reach back home, where they feel that they would have some kind of assistance from their families or home. It is actually a humanitarian crisis that we are looking at. And the problem is the lack of effective relief, which has led to the breach of constitutional rights, which is what we are going to talk about today. Now, when the lockdown in India was imposed on 24th of March 2020, it was done with the presumption. The government presumed that every person, every household in the country has food, has shelter, has drinking water, has housing, and enjoys equal status. Now, that was the biggest mistake that the government made. And it is in June and the months prior to this and in future that we will be left to grapple with the repercussion of that one decision. Now, the Indian response to the situation of the coronavirus pandemic has been largely limited to executive decrees which have been issued by the government under two laws, which were the Disaster Management Act of 2005 and the Epidemic Diseases Act of 1897. Well, the powers under these laws are wide and provide an executive carte blanche. The legislative bodies currently, if you look at the situation in India, the parliament, the state legislatures are not functioning. There is no system of any kind of a check and balance on the actions of the executive. The executive is just simply passing whatever orders it thinks is fit in the situation, and there is no check. So the concept of the basic concept of separation of powers goes missing here, where the legislature in the parliamentary system of democracy is missing in action. So there is no parliamentary questions being put on the government as to what they're doing to control and tackle with the pandemic. What are they doing about the rights and liberties of the people? There is no parliamentary committee to look into these questions. There's no parliamentary debate. On the other hand, if you look at a country like the United Kingdom, their parliament has met, and it has sort of, the questioning has highlighted the fact how the government was ill-equipped to deal with the pandemic in their country. So I think we need to have a very important look at this particular point where the legislature is missing in action. There is no check. Now, the only check which remains on executive action is through judicial oversight. And for a little bit of a time, I mean, only recently you see the judiciary sort of picking up its socks. But otherwise, it sort of has abdicated its responsibility to deal with the questioning of the government's action in dealing with the pandemic. So these are things that we must keep in mind. Another thing which I wanted to highlight before moving on to the moot point of the fundamental rights is that in India, there has been no formal emergency which has been imposed or declared. Very conveniently, the government has chosen to act under the two laws which give it wide and extensive powers, extraordinary powers, which are available normal in other circumstances during emergencies also. You see, in a normal emergency, you would have suspension, legitimate suspension of fundamental rights, except 20 and 21. There is a time limit imposed, there's parliamentary oversight. Now, all this is missing because there's no emergency which has been imposed. There is no some sort of a check on the exercise of the powers of the government. And what is the impact on the fundamental rights is not being questioned. There's no time limit which has been imposed. You can say that it's sort of a permanent state of emergency without there being any kind of accountability. Recently, the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, had made a very important remark, and he had warned that the pandemic must not be used as a pretext to trample over individual human rights. So that was a very important point which we needed to keep in mind. Looking at this kind of violation of civil liberties, when we talk of civil liberties, the constitutional rights, the fundamental rights, look back at the normal times. If you take the case of Canada, people would be walking in Toronto's High Park looking at the cherry blossoms because they have the freedom of movement, they have the freedom and the liberty to do what they like. People in Jodhpur would probably be going to visit the Mehrangarh Fort and utilizing their liberty and time according to their own desires. But that is something which is not happening in today's times. We cannot do this because there is a public health crisis. But that is not the only remedy, the only right which has been impacted. There are so many civil rights and fundamental rights which have been impacted, and I'm going to deal with, because we have a limited period of time, I'm going to deal with a few of them, but I will be talking to you about the impact on these rights on account of the measures adopted by the government, that is the executive, and because of the action of or inaction of the judiciary, how are they impacted in India. Now, as is evident that it is a fact that it is the most vulnerable sections of the country that have been the most affected by the pandemic and its measures, because the virus impacts people unequally. It is very harsh. It is not the rich which have been impacted so much, but it is the poor, the homeless, the migrants, the daily wage workers, the forest dwellers, the Adivasis, the Dalits, the Muslims, people with disabilities, which are the most vulnerable and who have been impacted. And in addition to that is the lives of the medical and the health professionals, which have suffered the most because of this pandemic. Now, the question is that are we to sit back and simply leave it to a Darwinian theory of natural selection, which satisfies our conscience and which tells us that either you adapt or face extinction? But that is not how it works in a civilized world. Now, coming to, this is the point where we need to raise questions about the rights which are affected. And I'm going to begin with a few of them. The first and the foremost, in my opinion, see, most of the rights which are affected at this point of time are rights which have evolved through judicial precedent, through interpretation largely of Article 21, the right to life and personal liberty. And from this interpretation given by the judiciary, we have derived certain additional rights, which I'm going to talk about, which are the most affected during this pandemic. And the number one being the right to health. The right to health. Hunger, starvation, inadequate facilities in the hospitals, and inadequate trained personnel have left us in such a sorry state today that there is no meaning of right to health. The first point here being the inadequate and unaffordable testing for the coronavirus. It is not that everybody can get themselves, even if they display symptoms in India, we have people who may not be able to either afford, or the government may not be testing sufficiently to trace people who are suffering from this virus. The second is that if you have contracted the coronavirus, you may not be able to afford the medical care in the country. So you may be left to deal with it by yourself, or rather left to die because of inadequacy of funds. I'll give you an example. It's a very sorry example, but it's an exception, if I may say so, but it is something which was a story some time back. In Madhya Pradesh, an 80-year-old man was chained to his bed after being treated because he could not afford to pay the medical dues of the treatment. So this is what we are resorting to. Delhi, if you may have heard recently, there was a lot of hype that there are no beds available in the hospitals for patients suffering from the symptoms of coronavirus. But on 14th of June, the government conducted a study and it was highlighted that Delhi has 9,802 beds, out of which 4,435 beds are vacant. So the hospitals which were refusing to admit people, saying that the beds are unavailable, were committing a violation of your right to health under Article 21, which has been held to be a fundamental right. Moreover, if you look at a very important decision of the Supreme Court of 1996, which is Paschim Banga Khet Mazdoor Samiti versus State of West Bengal, where the Supreme Court has held that a patient cannot be denied emergency aid by the hospital by saying that the bed is unavailable, because this amounts to a direct violation of your right to life and right to personal liberty. And the state cannot avoid its constitutional obligation in any manner or on account of its financial constraints. Moreover, if you look at Section 24D of the Disaster Management Act of 2005, it says that the State Executive Committee, in a threatening disaster management situation, is bound to provide shelter, food, drinking water, and essential provisions of healthcare and services to the people who are affected. It is duty bound. Moreover, if you look at the Code of Medical Ethics, the Act, the Indian Medical Council Act, Section 33 imposes an obligation on the doctors, on every doctor, to preserve human life. That is their fundamental duty. Look at the Constitution. The directive principles of Article 39E and 47 talk about healthcare. Not only are we talking about the right to health of the people, but we also are required to look into the right to health of the medical healthcare professionals, the doctors and nurses and other workers who are engaged in the treatment of people, who need to be provided with adequate personal protective equipments. They need to be given, thankfully, the Supreme Court has recently ordered that salaries must be disbursed to all the doctors who are the front foot soldiers in this pandemic. That's a huge step, at least that they should get some kind of a recognition of the work that they're rendering during this difficult time to keep us healthy and alive. The second right, which is affected, which I'm going to talk about, is the right to die with dignity. The right to die with dignity under Article 21, which has been held to be a right under Article 21 by the Supreme Court itself. If you look at the mishandling of the COVID-affected bodies, it's a very sorry state of affairs in India. I'm sure this is the, I was reading reports of, incidents happening to a similar nature in other countries, including in Europe. So on 11th of June, that is about a week ago, the Supreme Court took suo moto notice of a letter written to it by the senior advocate Ashwini Kumar, who highlighted the sorry state of affairs of how the disposal of bodies of COVID-19 patients, what was happening is really horrific if you listen to the stories. So in the matter of the proper treatment of COVID-19 patients and dignified handling of dead bodies in hospitals, which was heard by the Supreme Court on 12th of June, which was largely also based on the media reports which stated and brought forth to light the incidents where patients and the dead bodies were kept in the same ward. In one odd occasion, they were even kept on the same bed. And look at the mental trauma a patient would be going through because of this kind of a situation. Or the dead bodies were left in the waiting rooms or in the wards unattended. The relatives of the people who had died from COVID-19 were not informed for days, and they could not attend the last rites of the burial or the cremation of such bodies. So these shocking incidents which violated the right to die with dignity, which embraces the right to a decent burial or cremation under Article 21, has been brought to light during this pandemic. Now, when we talk of a right to a decent burial or decent cremation, which is the right to die with dignity, it has been held to be so in the case of Parmanand Katara versus Union of India in as far back as 1989, where the Supreme Court interpreted the word person under Article 29 to include a dead person in a limited sense. They said that any person's right to life includes the right to live with dignity, which, when given an extended meaning, means to treat his dead body with respect that it deserves. So this is one very important issue which has been brought forth during this pandemic. The third right which has been affected, again under Article 21, is the right to livelihood of those who are the vulnerable sections, and their right to wages, the right to what they need, without which they cannot survive. You know, the poor people may have money with them which can tide them over through this crisis, but the poor people who are living on a day-to-day basis, where only if they get their daily wages are they able to going to get a meal for themselves and for their family, those are the most affected by this pandemic and its harsh outcome. Now, a very important point which has again happened recently, which I'm going to talk about to you, is the government action. The government passed an order on 29th of March, which by the Home Secretary, who said that all employers of industries, of shops, of establishments must make the payment of wages to the workers without any deduction for the period of the lockdown. Now, this was an order made by the government to pay the wages to the workers. Now, agreed that the government did not have any other option at that point of time, and it did shift the burden to the private sector, where it thought that if the wages were given to the employees, they would be given their food, shelter, and they would not leave their place of work. But this did not happen, and the order was challenged before the Supreme Court as far back as in April. But not much happened. But recently, on 12th of June, the Supreme Court took up this matter and passed a bizarre order, if I may be allowed to categorize it as such. Now, why was it bizarre? The order of the Supreme Court, which has been passed on 12th of June, says that, so basically the Supreme Court refused to rule on any kind of a legal issue. It postponed the arguments to end of July. Look at this matter deserves all kind of speed that you can give it. The people are dying from hunger, starvation, and are walking back home and they're dying there. Can we afford to delay the things further? Really? So they have postponed the arguments to end of July. They have directed the employers and the employees to negotiate between themselves. Again, a very strange order, because the vulnerable party here is the employee. How does it negotiate with the employer to give it wages? The employer is not going to give him wages. That's why the government actually stepped in and passed the order imposing an obligation on the employer to pay wages to the employee. And in the meantime, there was an interim order passed by the Supreme Court preventing any kind of coercive action against employees for not following the direction of the government to pay wages. So in actual fact, what has the Supreme Court done? The Supreme Court has rendered the government order unenforceable without actually calling it illegal. So they have not ruled on the legality of the order, but they've said that it is unenforceable. Now, what was the government action? The government enforced the lockdown, and to enforce the lockdown in place, it shifted the burden to the private parties. What is the court done? What has the court done here? Now, court's position is precarious, because if it upholds the government order, it will be asymmetrical because it has imposed the entire burden on the private employer. However, the court does not find a solution to mitigate the impact of the lockdown on the weaker and the marginalized section. So they've not given us any kind of a solution. Now, you can maybe say that Article 19(1)(g), which talks about the freedom of trade and commerce, is violated, of the employer is violated, because you are compelling the employer to pay something when their own establishment, when their own industry is shut and they cannot earn something. So their right, fundamental freedom is affected. But on the other hand, look at it the other way. Article 21, right to livelihood of the workers, the employees, is affected because they are not now able to work and they are not getting wages. Article 14 is also impacted in this situation here. Why? Because those people who have the ability and the capability to work from home, as opposed to those who do not have the wherewithal or are not in a job of a kind where they can work from home, are being treated and impacted unequally because of the lockdown. So Article 14, the principle of equality comes into play here. Now, when there are, three different fundamental rights in play here, how does the court resolve the situation? A recent RTI Act judgment, Supreme Court has noted that if two or more fundamental rights are clashing with each other, it is the doctrine of proportionality which must be engaged with. And there must be a balancing exercise which must be carried out where neither of the rights are effaced and the best solution is given. So if you look at the situation, actually the lockdown has not entirely taken away the right to livelihood. It's a temporary measure. And also, if you look at the situation, the employer's right to freedom of trade and commerce is also not violated because there's no closure of the establishment. It's not a permanent closure. It's only a temporary one. So the situation can be dealt in a different manner. Now, the burden has been imposed on the employer by the state. The burden has been shifted on the state, but what does the employer here have to do? The employer must ask the government to bear the burden. It must ask the employers have to take this burden, shift it onto the state because this has come upon them because of state action. So that is the solution and not judicial evasion that we are saying over here. So the remedy is not really to throw the vulnerable section out of the equation, and that's the easiest thing for the judiciary to do or for the government to do. One more very important right which has been affected by this is the right to privacy. Right to privacy has been affected on various accounts. I'm going to give you talk about two particular incidents here. One is the action of the Karnataka government, which published on online platforms the names and details of all COVID patients. You have released the entire information about these people. You have asked them to take selfies of where they are every 1 hour and send it to them. Now, what is happening? It's not only a violation of the right to privacy, which is at stake here, but what it has led to is the stigmatization of COVID patients. People treat them like untouchables. You have inculcated a sense of untouchability. It's like, declaring war. People who are suffering from COVID symptoms are the enemy for you, which you have to keep separate. You cannot be with them. You will not accept them in the society. So what is the impact of that? That people do not come forward to disclose their symptoms. They are afraid. They have that fear instilled in them because of this action of the government. Another point here under right to privacy is the app in India, which the government has ordered every employee in the public sector to have on their mobile phones, which is the Arogya Setu app, which promotes a sort of a surveillance state because it requires so many details of medical and personal details, which are not really needed for the tracing of persons with COVID symptoms. If you look at Singapore, they have they have got an app, but with far lesser details. Another thing here is that the data in the Arogya Setu app is not deleted once you have gotten over this pandemic. There must be a provision, there must be a sunset clause that the data or the app is permanently deleted. We do not have such a thing. So it's a permanent surveillance state that we are talking about, which we need to talk about and take care. And what is happening here is a very important point, which is the right of any individual to be forgotten. Under Article 21, you have under the Puttaswamy judgment, you have the right to privacy, and under that you have the right to be forgotten. And a very good case in example is the very popular Google Spain case, where a Spanish citizen filed a case against Google, which had given information about the person's financial hardship through various links. And this Spanish citizen had filed a case against Google, asking the Court of Justice of the European Union to erase this information from the records of Google. And the Court of Justice upheld this action and the right to be forgotten of the Spanish citizen. It ruled in favor of the citizen by acknowledging that yes, every citizen has a right to be forgotten, and his privacy was being violated in this manner. Because it said that any information which has become irrelevant and inadequate, the person has a legitimate right to get such data removed from the internet. So the right to be forgotten from the internet to privacy. And see, the right to be forgotten is based and grounded on a very fundamental point, which is that every citizen has control over his or her digital footprint. And no one else can acquire complete control over the data which has been generated by him. So these are the few rights that I wanted to talk about and highlight particularly. In addition, you have the right to food being affected, the right to education of so many people, because not everyone has access to online technology and the wherewithal, the right to access to justice, which Professor Sebastian Lafrance will also be talking about. There are so many hindrances to effective justice during this time. Very few matters being taken up, not effective enough. And if you look at trials, there are so many other problems. How do you arrange the visits to the people in the jails, the victim participation in a trial, ensure the security and sanctity of victims' testimony during the recording of video conferencing evidence? And how do you ensure the confidentiality and the privacy limits of the clients and lawyers? So these are so many issues that are being highlighted because of the pandemic. And the list is endless. Now, what I want to say in the end, because I'm just going to wind up, is that while the scientists are working to develop a cure or a vaccine, and the doctors and nurses and the other health professional staff is working to treat the sick suffering from the COVID-19, we have a responsibility. And that responsibility is to demand that our governments ensure a just and equitable response to this pandemic. We cannot let it off so easily, because as citizens, it is our duty during this time to speak up. And the ultimate goal must be to preserve both human life and human dignity. So thank you very much. That's all that I wanted to talk about. I will hand over the talk and discussion to Professor Sebastian Lafrance, who will be now speaking about the Canadian perspective.